4 in Cairo. It's now time for Word of Info. This is Word of Info with Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Dua Muhammad at the controls. I'm Najla Naguib, and we're with you until 5 o'clock, so stay with us. So good afternoon, and we're taking you right to Portugal, and with our distinguished guest, Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Madelena Fischer, or Maria Madelena Cavallo Fischer, Her Excellency Ambassador of Portugal in Egypt. Hello, and sorry for...
No problem. Hello.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Madelena Fischer. She is not any character. She's a very special character. She has been serving in Pakistan, in Germany, in Lisbon, and she has her first ambassadorship here in Portugal, in Cairo, as a representative of the Portuguese government and an ambassador. And she has seen a lot in a very short period of time. For the first time, an Egyptian president has visited Portugal, Lisbon, and definitely, and the United Nations Secretary General, who is Portuguese, was visiting Egypt last week. There are a lot of things to talk about Portugal, but first of all, let me welcome you here to our program, because definitely you are a very busy lady, and yet you have given us kind enough the chance to visit us in our radio program and to talk about a friendly country. It has very long-term relationship between Egypt and Portugal. Thank you very much again for coming.
I have to thank you. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be here today with you, very good friends that I had the chance to meet here in Cairo, and but also I have to thank you for the opportunity to speak to a lot of Egyptian people through the radio, because I think it's very important, to get to the people. And for an ambassador nowadays, this is one of the most important things to do, is to speak to the people and to tell them how important it is, this work that we do every day, that it is to connect and to have links between both countries, between the Egyptian people and the Portuguese people, and at the end of the day always try to achieve something that can improve that relationship.
Well, it's the popular diplomacy that Her Excellency has been speaking about, which definitely has changed the way diplomats themselves are looking to the profession, mixing and matching with the people, discussing with them the depth of the relation, which sometimes people really can hardly believe that it's been here for almost 100 years officially, but we didn't count the people-to-people relations that has been there for hundreds of years. People Absolutely. From Portugal, from the Andalusian Peninsula and from the Spanish Peninsula have been coming here to Egypt. Iberian Peninsula have been coming here to Egypt, exchanging a lot of things, not just trade, but thoughts, ideas, and talks. Absolutely. So it's part of the profession now to continue this long track of the talk between civilizations that will bring people together. So speaking about civilization and speaking about empires, we definitely have to start by going back into the history, talking about the continental Portugal of today, which was a part of the Umayyad Khalifa and its inheritors from 711. It lasted in some territories even till 1249. How Portugal of today see this period? Because some people, especially I think in the medieval centuries and in the 19th century, up to the 19th century, thought that this was sort of an invasion or sort of a strange relation between masters and slaves. Well, actually it was not true, because in going to historical archives we found out that the number of people who crossed with Tariq ibn Ziyad were almost 5,000 people, and then the amount of people who crossed from Africa towards the Iberian Peninsula never reached more than 50,000 people all through the years of the Andalusians over there. So it was a civilization, had some enlightenment from the Arab Peninsula, had enlightenment from the Islamic civilization, but actually it was built by the hands and the arms of the Portuguese, of the Spaniards at that time. These people were the masters of this civilization, and they were the one who introduced this civilization. How the Portuguese of today look at this period?
Well, I think between Egypt and Portugal we have a lot of things in common. One of those things, it's I'm sure it is the conscience that we have of history, because both countries have a long history. Of course, Egypt is, a unique case in history with more than 5,000 years, but Portugal is also almost 900 years. And this period in our history is a very important one, because it shaped the kind of country that we are today, and it shaped very much the culture and the way the Portuguese people are today. As you know, this kind of invasion, people speak about the Arab invasion to the peninsula. It started 711, and it was especially strong in the south of the peninsula, Portugal and Spain, and of course the kingdom of Cordoba lasted 200 years more than in the territory that it is today, Portugal. But nevertheless, it was 500 years of a presence in Portugal, in today Portugal, from people coming from north of Africa. Especially these were Berbers coming from Tunisia, Algeria, and the people realize today that these people, as you told, there were not huge amounts of people. So it was not.
It was a drop in the genetic pool.
Of course, it was very important one, and we see nowadays still a lot of influence. For example, in the language, we have around, we say, 1,800 words that are coming from Arabic. We see a lot of influence on the people, on the genetic composition of the Portuguese. We see a lot of influence, for example, on cooking.
Yes.
The things we use for cook, especially in the south, on architecture. So the presence of these people is still very present in Portugal.
And
for
perhaps
example,
one of the most important words that you have just told us about is inshallah.
Inshallah,
You
yes.
say it in Portuguese.
Oxalá.
Oxalá. So it's the same, whether this is in Portuguese
Or in Spain.
In Spain, you say inshallah, or what they say to what in
In
Spain?
Spanish they say ojalá,
Ojalá, yes.
but it's exactly the same word.
And it
you know?
carries the same meaning,
The
right?
same meaning. Of course, the Portuguese people or the Spanish, they don't realize what they are saying, because for us this is a word that we know as a Portuguese one, but it is inshallah, of course. So it's the Portuguese way to say it.
Yes.
And like this, there are a lot of words, also places. For example, in Portugal, there are a lot of villages and cities that have still Arabic names.
Yes.
Alcázar, for example, or a lot of them. So it is very interesting to see this presence still.
So it's a minor drop in the genetic pool, but a greater influence on the
yes.
human beings and
Yes.
on the architecture, on the language, on cooking. So all of this is a great mixture, more than an invasion,
Absolutely.
right?
And the other thing I would like to tell you is that this period is for us also very important, because during these 500 years, we had in Portugal and Spain really a big mixture of religions, because a big part of them, they were Christians. Then there were, of course, the Muslim populations,
And there were the Jews, of
then
course.
there were the Jews,
course.
exactly. And all these people lived there, in peace.
And they all worked in one direction, and there was a very famous trade of all types of merchandise, including thoughts and ideas,
Absolutely.
which is very important.
Because we are speaking from a time in history where really, the Arabic civilization was the
Leading
brightest one. It was leading, in culture, in science, in medicine, in a lot of areas. So we say also in Portugal that, for example, the technological advance that we had in Portugal when we started the discoveries, it was also in part because of this influence and this knowledge that we get from the Arabic people and from the Jews, of course.
Yes, of course.
So it was this melting pot that was there that enabled us to start this fantastic historic process of the discoveries.
And we cannot deny the effect that these imported Arabs were affected by the nature of the country that they are becoming, they adopted as their country, and vice versa. So we can say definitely that the philosophers who lived there, or the scientists who lived there, got very much impressed by the nature, than the hard nature that they were living in the peninsula, or the Arab Peninsula, which is the desert. Now they had exposure to a different culture, different type of weather, different types of nature, and this led to a huge leap in philosophy from use. For example, when we talk about Ibn Rushd, we can never say that Ibn Rushd's ideas of thinking and way of theological studies that he has really led was definitely influenced by the environment that he was living in. So it goes both ways. It's not just a give and take, or a master and slave. No, I think it was a melting pot for all the people who were living there.
I agree totally with you. Yes, absolutely.
So if we, after the break, we have to talk about the turning point that changed Portugal from a country that has its own secure borders into an empire of great importance.
Yes. It is a very interesting case in history, I think, because if you realize at those times, Portugal was a small kingdom at the very last edge of this continental Europe.
Yes.
And we had this big neighbor that it was Spain. So for us, in that small kingdom there, it was very difficult to establish contacts with the other continental European nations. So we had always a very important and very strategic relationship with England, of course, because it was over the sea, it was easy. And on the other side, it was a very complicated relationship with Spain. So for us, really, the option, was to go to the sea, because this was our natural element. And so that's why people started, because it was, of course, the main drive. I would say it was an economic one, because the country, of course, it's not so big, and the population was also not so big, but the main drive was really to have new markets. So that's why people looked to the sea as the gateway, and started this fantastic movement that was the discoveries. And so that's why people say nowadays that the Portuguese were really the first ones to invent, globalization.
Yes.
Because we started to travel with these small boats in the 14th century to Morocco, and then along the African coast.
Yes.
And so 415, it's the magical date, let's say, that we say it was the starting of this big empire that lasted for 580 years, actually.
So it's definitely a very interesting period, and as you said, it has some influence from the navigators, the Arab navigators, who are definitely
very much.
We can say that they are Portuguese navigators with some Arab genes in them, right?
Yes, but not only, because I think the Portuguese population was very small at the time. We estimate that most probably 14th century we were 1.5 million, so very, very few. And of course, in those times, they catched people from other places, and that went into the ships and to travel. And for example, we know nowadays that when they reached what it is nowadays Mozambique, on the east coast of Africa, it were some Arab navigators that took the Portuguese boats to India, because of course those were seas that we didn't know. So it was the Arabs that helped us to reach India.
Ah, yes, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So after the break.
Yes, back again, World of Info, and you can call us at 257-89407. And today we have our distinguished guest, Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Madelena Fischer, Ambassador of Portugal in Egypt. So back again, World of Info with Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Madelena Fischer, Ambassador of Portugal in Egypt, and Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University.
Well, it's what we are hearing right now was a fado song. And you have attracted our attention that the lady who sang this song her name is Arabic, right? Her name is Ana Moro?
Mora.
Mora. Mora comes from Moroccan.
Yeah.
So the fado is a very special type of song. It definitely carries a lot of emotional, we can't say weakness, but definitely there is a lot of sadness in the notes of the song, and the voice. I've noticed that all the fado singers are not sopranos; they are all mezzo sopranos, more or less.
Yes, you are right.
Their voice is strong, full of emotions, and they are controlling the notes in order to express a lot of feelings, even if you don't understand the language. It's like an opera singing, where you can sometimes not catch up with the vowels and with the vocabulary, but definitely you get hooked up in the emotions that are behind that. Tell us about fado, since we have brought a song and we'll have another song in the next intermission.
With pleasure. You know, fado is really this very typical Portuguese song that some people say it reflects the soul of the Portuguese people. It is indeed a song that it is full of melancholy, that it is sometimes sad, but it is something always very emotional. And one of the words that it is also very typical, and people say this word exists only in Portuguese, is the word saudade. And saudade is a word that expresses this feeling, you know, from that you are missing something, that you are missing the loved ones that are not there. And that comes also from our history, because as I told you, the Portuguese people started in the 14th century, the 15th century to go abroad, to go to the world. Of course, a lot of these people never came back again, because they had accidents at sea and they died, because they settled down in those countries where they went. And so for the people who remained in Portugal, for the families, for the mothers and for the wives, there was always this feeling, you know, to miss someone that is not there.
Grief and loss.
Grief and loss. So this is a little bit the feeling that fado expresses. And it is interesting because that explains also a little bit the way the Portuguese Empire, and I come back to the history, it was built, because Portuguese, as I told you, were the first Europeans to start this process. But because the population was so small, the idea from the beginning was, and there was even some direction from the state, well, from the king in those days, to say, you go there, you settle there, and you marry these people to have children that then feel Portuguese. So that's why you see, for example, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, of course, all these countries that still today speak Portuguese, the Portuguese-speaking countries, so that we have nowadays around 250 million people that are native speakers for Portuguese. Because it was a very calculated politic from the state to mingle with the people where the Portuguese went. That's why also you arrive today in Portugal and you see this is most probably the country in Europe that it is special in that sense, because it's really a very big melting pot. Everyone came to Portugal and we spread everywhere in the world, so that nowadays you have Portuguese that are black, other ones that are Asian, from Asia, everything. So this is something very special, but that's, you know, that you can see in the architecture, you can see it in the songs, you can see the way, you know, in the food, everything. For example, if you go to a cafe in Portugal, you find chamuças everywhere, you know, this very typical pastry from India, because we are used to, we had a colony in India for almost 500 years, so you know, the change of cultures is very strong with the whole world.
So returning to Sudad, since it attracted my attention, the idea of Sudad is there is an Arabic word as-sadad, which is the right path. So it looks part of
Yes,
الهمنا طريق السداد.
Sadat.
السداد means the right path. It's exactly like, for example, in the pharaonic religion or the ancient religion of Egypt, they would weigh the heart in front. The heart of the deceased is weighed in front of a feather, and they call this feather ma'at, and ma'at stands for the truth.
Interesting, yes.
So if your heart is lighter than the ma'at, than this piece of feather, you'll go to heaven.
Perhaps there is a link there.
So yes, so that is, it could be like that. I mean, because I think that these people who were lost went to the right path. They went for a good cause. So maybe this is how they are seeing it. It could have some Arabic ancestorship. Yes. We don't know. Anyway, this part of history has taken us, that it has spearheaded the European exploration of the world, and from the 14th century you have talked about that, but Portugal was one of the world's major economic, military and political powers from the 15th century until the late 16th century. Why such a great empire was short-lived? Is it just because of the population, the lack of the population?
In part, it was the lack of the population, of course, and then there were also some internal problems, let's say, because at the beginning of the 16th century, we had a king that was Don Sebastian, who went for a military, march to Morocco. And this was a very interesting figure in our history because it was a very young king, and he died in this battle. So suddenly Portugal, which was at the height of
he had no inheritor, right?
He had no inheritor, yes, exactly. So suddenly we had no inheritor to continue the kingdom, and the Spanish king took over Portugal
and act as a co-regent of the king.
Exactly.
Yes. So he had these two names. So he was called Felipe number 2 and Felipe number 1 of Portugal, right?
He was Felipe II of Spain and Felipe I of Portugal.
Yes.
So during 80 years there was a kind of personal union between Portugal and Spain. And in those times, of course, a lot of our colonies lost some power, and at the same time, it was the time also when, especially the Dutch and the British started to go also
on their own expeditions.
Oh, exactly, and to take over some of our colonies. But that was a little bit the starting process. Yes.
So definitely these were hard times, because sometimes the historians claim that with the occupation by Napoleon, Portugal began a slow but a very noticeable decline that lasted until the 20th century. How far is this statement true?
Look, of course, these were very difficult times because Napoleon, he tried to take over Portugal 3 times. So we had this this period where they came to the country and they devastated the economy. But it is also very interesting because exactly in that period our king was very smart. We had a very strong connection in those times with Britain, and the king took the decision, imagine it, in those days to leave Portugal and to go to Brazil.
Yes,
because Brazil was a colony. And so he didn't want to stay in Lisbon when the Napoleonic army was coming. So they took everything, the books and the œuvre d'art, everything, and they went to Rio de Janeiro. This was 1807. 1807, it was the first time in history that European king went to live in a colony. And from that point until 1821, all the Portuguese Empire was ruled from the colony, from Rio de Janeiro, which was the capital. And then, of course, the king adapted and adjusted to Brazil, and he didn't want to come back again.
Yes, this is what when I was reading that, I found that very interesting.
It is a very interesting story. because of course he was feeling very happy there in Brazil, you know, the weather, everything.
Because you know, a Brazilian friend of mine told him how you have a visa for all the world's countries very easily, and he said to me, "We are living in heaven. Nobody wants to leave." Right?
Exactly. So there was, at the time, it was actually the parliament who said to the king, "Look, you have to come back. If not, we are going to choose another one." So the king, he had a lot of pressure to come back to Portugal. He came to Portugal, 1821, but he left his son there, Dom Pedro. And Dom Pedro, 1 year later, he declares then the independence of Brazil.
Very well expected.
Yes, because it was, and we know nowadays that they arranged this solution, you know, because it is very interesting also. If you take a look to South America, you had this colonization from Portugal and from Spain. And of course, with the end of the presence of both Portugal and Spain in South America, the Spanish colonies, they disintegrated. That's why you have nowadays so many countries that speak Spanish. But if you take a look, you have this huge country, which is Brazil, that
kept its integrity and unity.
Exactly, yeah. And we say nowadays, the Brazilians say nowadays, this was because the king was so clever to say to his son, "Look, we know that this will happen if we want it or not.
Let
so
it be
it's
in
better."
our own hands.
Exactly, it's better that you do it. So it was the son of the king who declared the independence of Brazil, and this was probably, you know, the chance to keep the country reunited like that and in its integrity.
But this was short-lived, unfortunately, right?
Well,
the Kingdom of Brazil.
Yes, the king, it was, because then it came, you know, the revolution, and it came also, you know, the republic some years later, of course. But the fact is that today you still have this huge Brazil, which is almost a continent in South America.
And 150 million people.
200 million.
200
million people in Brazil.
Yes, still going and going,
Yes.
right? So this is very interesting, because this will take us to a very crucial, important point of history of Portugal. That is the new history and the modern history of Portugal. After the break, we have to talk about Salazar.
Yes.
Right? If you
Yes.
don't mind, because this is an important period. The man had some of his fallacies, but definitely he saved the country from going in the inferno of World War II.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about Salazar after the break.
Yes, back again, word of info, and you can call us at 257-89407. And today we have Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Madelena Cavallo Fischer, Ambassador of Portugal to Egypt. So back again, word of info and more about Portugal.
So Salazar is a man, and by the strange coincidence, although he has inflicted a sort of like a military rule, he was never an officer.
No, absolutely.
And
He was
this
a professor.
He was a professor, and then I found that this man has changed into a dictator where everybody followed suit his orders, and the man stayed in power from 1932 till 1968. And it is believed, there is a rumor that in the final 3 years of his life, he was almost like a clinically dead or Alzheimer case,
Exactly.
and nobody tried ever to challenge his authority. And then the country went into a sort of inertia, ruled by inertia, as if Salazar was there with his aides controlling the situation till the revolution of 1975. So how come a man can control such intelligent people, such brilliant population who are all highly educated and who are definitely by far one of the most sophisticated population with a great relation to the past and the future, and yet they were controlled by a single human being from 1932 till 1972, even post-mortem. So how come?
It is an interesting story, you know, but I think to understand that you have to realize that in Portugal the first 20 years of the 20th century were very troubled years. 1910 we had the revolution with the implementation of the republic. So the king went into exile, the king and his family. There was these big revolutions, and the king decided then to leave the country. And from that point until 1926, when Salazar is appointed as a minister, at the beginning as a minister of finance, it was really a big chaos in the country. We had several governments, sometimes for a couple of weeks only, and after some years, people were very, the instability was very big, and people wanted to have some stability again. As a result of that instability, the financial situation of the country was very difficult, and that's why these people go to Coimbra, which is one of our oldest cities, and in Coimbra there is this University of Coimbra, which is also one of the oldest in Europe. It comes from the 14th century. And Salazar was a very known professor for finance in this university. So the military regime is going there to Coimbra to pick him up, to come to Lisbon and to take care of the finance. And this is the way it starts. After some years, then it takes over the government as a prime minister, and from 1933 we have this regime that it is not a military regime, as you said, but it is an authoritarian regime. We have to see that these are the years where in Europe you have this trend, this political trend.
To have dictators, yes.
To have this kind
Stalin,
of...
Mussolini,
exactly. Hitler,
and
Mussolini,
in Romania, and
then also Franco in Spain. So this was, this kind of political trend.
It was fashionable.
Exactly, it was fashionable to have very strong
even in Hungary
regimes, exactly, with these authoritarian people. He was supported by the military, but at the end of the day, it was he and several other people that were around him that really took over the control in the country.
And he was intelligent enough not to let the military overthrow him at any moment.
Absolutely, exactly.
This is very strange.
Yes.
That is differently. I mean, this is the same thing that happened with Hitler. Hitler was with the rank of a corporal.
Yes.
And Mussolini was a civilian. We have to do that. We have to say the truth about
Franco
Mussolini.
was a military regime.
But Franco was a general.
Yes.
But Mussolini was a politician.
Exactly.
I think he was a lawyer even, right?
Yeah.
And Hitler is a failed painter,
Yeah.
Flop in painting. I wonder if he had succeeded, the world would have been saved a lot. I mean, people should have bought his paintings, for God's sake. So when we're talking about this crucial...
But I think Salazar, he started, as I told you, as a finance minister, and he was very efficient. So in a year he took control of the finance, and he was able to put the country again in the right path.
He was not corrupted?
He was not corrupted. That, I think, it's the big difference if you compare the situation in Portugal to the situation in other countries in Europe in those days. He was not a corrupt man, but he was someone that was very autocratic, someone that wanted to have control with all areas of politics and life in society. And of course he was also he was very able, for example, on the foreign policy, because especially during the period of the Second World War...
Yes, he was intelligent not to put you in the inferno, definitely.
Exactly, he was a very wise man, and he managed, to have more or less good relations with the Allies, with Britain, which was always our a big ally, and later on with the Americans, but also in some way with Germany. Yeah?
So that's why they say if World War II were a lot of war of bullets, but in Lisbon this was the war of spies, right?
Yes,
the espionage business was thriving over there. All the countries had their own representations, and every undercover action started in the embassies over there in Lisbon at that hard times, right?
Lisbon was a very important place for the spies, as you say, but also for the refugees. A lot of refugees, especially the Jewish people, they came in those days to Portugal, and from Portugal they went to South America, they went to America, for example.
So this is why he was saved from after World War II. Nobody prosecuted him, right?
In a way, yes.
Yes.
If you remember this fantastic play, this fantastic film, Casablanca.
Yes.
At the end of the film, when Ingmar Bergman is taking the
Yes.
plane, do you
Right.
know where the plane is going?
It was going to Lisbon?
To Lisbon. The plane is going to
I
Lisbon. huh?
remember the last scene of Humphrey Bogart standing in
Everybody-
the airport. Everybody knows
remembers.
that. And she's riding the plane. This is
Exactly.
a classical movie.
Yes, but the plane is going to Lisbon, you know, and this was exactly the situation, because in those days a lot of refugees came, you know, from Germany, from Hungary, from France, and they came to Lisbon, and from there they went to the rest of the world. Actually, there are some fantastic stories from this period, because we have 2-3 ambassadors in those days that were placed, you know, in the southern of France or in Hungary, and they were giving visas to these Jewish people.
Like
yeah?
the famous Swedish
Exactly
diplomat
the same,
in Budapest,
the same,
right?
exactly, yeah. And there are thousands of people that were
Saved.
that are alive and that were saved in those days because of the very courageous acts from these diplomats, you know. Sometimes without instructions from Lisbon. Of course, in those days it was difficult sometimes to ask for instructions, but these are fantastic stories. Huh?
Yes. So when we look back at that period, I've watched a very touchy movie, and that is Midnight Train to Lisbon. I believe you have seen it.
Yes.
And it talks about this period in particular,
Yes.
and about how people are trying to distance themselves from this period, the period of atrocities that were made by an efficient system. There had to be victims, and
Yes.
these victims were the victims of opinion.
Absolutely.
The people who were harassed, thrown in jails, being subjected to a lot of violence, and some of them lost their lives. All this, the country in the end of the day found itself, yes, this could have been the harasser, or this abuser could have been my uncle, could have been my cousin,
Absolutely.
and at the same time the one who's harassed is another distant uncle. After all, this is definitely a small community and a small country, and the number of people who were involved in as a sort of victims and assailants were almost like a family.
Absolutely.
So this is the summary of the film, and this is actually the summary of the
this
story of
period.
Salazar. Yes.
Absolutely, yes. And then I think for a long period people accepted that there were some limitations, you know, on public opinion, on freedom of
Speech.
opinion, everything, of speech, because of course the concerns with the war, with the security and everything. But if you see from the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, people, the awareness about the situation, the real situation, started to grow stronger, and especially there was this movement against the wars in Africa, because especially from the beginning of the 60s, in all these Portuguese colonies in Africa, in Angola, in Mozambique, in Cape Verde, in Guinea-Bissau, we started to have these colonial wars. And of course Salazar decided we have to keep these territories, these are Portuguese territories, this is part of our nation, so he was sending the young people to the war. And the population was more and more against it, because they didn't accept anymore that we should still be there in Africa, in those countries, to rule those countries without, you know, the participation from the local people.
Of course.
So that's why you have then this Revolution 74, you know. It was a revolution that was made by the army, by the young officers in the army, because those people didn't want to go anymore to fight the war against the locals in those countries. And of course the population in Portugal was very much against these wars. That's why you have this Revolution 74, and 75 you have this very political decision to give independence to all these colonies.
Yes, but when people came back, when the army came back from the colonies, there was another reform, if we can say, use the word reform revolution, or an organized political movement, or organized military coup, because in these 2 years there was a decline on the economic level, definitely, and the idea of going towards the communist side in the wrong timing has definitely differed really the economy and produced this reformal movement
Absolutely.
that happened in 1976. Afterwards, Portugal has been rising in the side of economy for a long period of time. Even after 2008, when there was a crash, Portugal is starting to recover out of that. We know that we're running out of time, but we have to talk about the Egyptian-Portuguese relations.
Yes.
Because this is important. The fact that our president has visited Portugal as the first state visit to see a country that has such a strong ties, and directing his own attention and the attention of Egypt towards a distant friend, but so distant, yes, but definitely so near. Tell us about the circumstances behind this visit, and what were the results that you expect of such an important visit of a dignitary over there.
This was a very important visit because this was the first state visit in 24 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the last visit of a president to Portugal, of Egyptian president to Portugal, was 24 years ago. And when I arrived, I realized that it was necessary to do something. You know, these visits are important because you raise awareness about another country and about a relationship. And as you told, it is our relations are so old between Portugal and Egypt, and in these last years, due of course to the financial problems that we were experiencing in Portugal, like other countries in Europe, but also due to the instability that you were living also here since 2010, 2011, the relations were a little bit, on a small level of intensity. And in Portugal we have a new government since 2015, and we have a new president that arrived last year at the beginning and at 2016, and it was the decision of our president to say, look, this country is so important for us, for our relation, that we should do something, and I would like very much to invite the Egyptian president to visit Portugal. So it was a fantastic occasion because the president, he went there with a big delegation, and he had the chance, to speak with our president, with our prime minister, to visit the parliament, to have an exchange of views with all the parties that are represented in the parliament, to have meetings with some business people, to address also some young people about the situation in Egypt. And these visits are very important also because after that, there is a big curiosity about the other country. So that's why now I think we have a lot of work to do, because I have a lot of business people that are calling me and want to take a look into the Egyptian market,
Yes.
and also Egyptian people that are coming to us and would like to see the possibilities to increase the trade exchange with Portugal. Also on the level of universities, there is a big interest from our side also to have some closer relations with the Egyptian universities. So I think this is we have now a fantastic ground to increase our bilateral relation. And I'm very happy that I could have the visit of the president in the first year I was
during
here.
your tenure, yes.
because of course now I have the possibility to
work on it.
Yes,
to add on
exactly.
it, yes.
Yes.
So we have also a very important person for the very first time as having a post in the United Nations, and he is the General Secretary of the United Nations. And the man is a very important man, and he has led a very colorful career in your country. And definitely his visit to Egypt this year was his first visit as Secretary General, and one of the very few first countries to visit. I mean, he has been appointed in January and will come in mid-February. This is very important. Tell us about this visit. Of course, you were involved on the national level, since you are carrying the same passport. Definitely you were there and you met the gentleman, and
Yes.
you know him personally, right?
Yes.
Of course.
I know him personally, but he was exactly 1 week before he was here in Egypt. He was making a tour of the region and was visiting some other countries, but he was here last week effectively. But last year he was here twice. because when he presented his candidacy for this posting, he visited several countries. And actually, the first country he visited when they started the visits was Cairo.
Mhm.
He was here to have some exchanges and some contacts. And of course, he was staying with me at the residence of Portugal for
Oh,
these days.
that's
Yes.
lovely.
Because, we started this process because we were not, or let's say like that, Portugal was not on the radar to have the Secretary General of the United Nations, because we knew that should be an European, but at the beginning people were speaking about someone from East Europe, and it should be also a woman. So neither of these criteria
Are fitting
was
in Portugal.
fitting to Portugal. Huh? But Antonio Guterres is really someone that has a fantastic career.
He has before worked in the as a minister, right?
He was prime minister,
Prime Minister and a Prime
exactly
Minister.
for 8 years, and he was then for 10 years the High Commissioner for Refugees. So and he was also someone that was traveling a lot in this part of the world. He was traveling a lot to Africa, to South America, to Asia. So we realized, that he had a lot of, criteria that could fit for this job. And actually, when we started to have some contacts, we realized also that he was someone that was very well known in a lot of countries, and a lot of people liked him very much.
A man who's involved with the most important, crucial mission in the world, which
Refugees.
is UNHCR.
Absolutely.
And he has given a lot of emotional involvement.
Absolutely.
And he has shown great courage in facing the problem
Yes.
and trying to help as much as possible people.
Yes.
Definitely, he deserves the job, because he will take all this expertise of look of kindness to the people of the world that he has taken
Yes.
from the refugees. Definitely, this is important. I mean, he has seen flesh and blood
Absolutely.
and souls and
Yeah.
mutilated souls.
And if you speak with him, you really see this is a very normal person. This is a very simple person. This is someone who engages very easily with the other one. And I think that helps a lot. Also, the fact that he's Portuguese, because as you know, also again, because of our history, we feel that he's everywhere in the world, and we have a very open relation, a very sometimes very emotional also relation with countries in Africa, with countries in South America, with the Arab countries. And I have to tell you that Egypt was from the first moment really a big supporter of Mr. Antonio Guterres.
That's lovely to hear. And so, of course, that there's two famous Portuguese here in Egypt.
I know.
Very well known.
Manuel José is one of them.
Yes, Manuel José is one of them.
And Ronaldo is the other one.
Everywhere you go, people ask you about
Yes.
Manuel José, and you feel a lot of pride in being Portuguese like him.
Yes, I really feel a lot of pride on that. And I have to tell you, when we had the President Sisi in Portugal in November, of course we invited Manuel José to attend the official dinner.
Yes.
And he was the star of this dinner, because everybody from the delegation wanted to have a photo with Manuel José.
That's lovely. And since Messi has come to our Argentinian
So
friend,
now we are
Sergio
waiting
Ball,
for Ronaldo.
You have to bring Ronaldo
Us.
to Egypt, because definitely people would enjoy
Definitely,
his
yes.
presence, and he will have his own photo shoot in the pyramids.
Exactly.
Why not, right? Excellency, it's been a pleasure. You've been very informative. You have given us a lot of thoughts and ideas with a lot of emotional impact. We love all the information that you have shared, and we really enjoyed the last part, talking about FADO and talking about the most important thing about the current Secretary General of the United Nations, a man who's carrying the brunt of the whole world, and at the same time with a lot of emotions and a lot of humanity.
Yes, and by this we come to the end of World of Info. Today we have Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Madelena Fischer, Ambassador of Portugal in Egypt. We had Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Da Mohammed at the controls. I'm Najla Naguib. See you next Thursday, same time, same station, FM 95.4.